And now Georgia lawmakers are denouncing the violence against public officials.
Atlanta News First political reporter Doug Reardon spoke to Georgia legislators today, joining us live at 5 from the state capitol. Doug?
Well, Joe, Carly, things were quiet here today at the Georgia Capitol, business as usual, but lawmakers were talking to each other as well as to state and local police departments about what to do next.
I would say that it has me on high alert.
Outside the Capitol Monday, State Representative Tanya Miller was reflective of an event that hit close to home. A weekend shooting, leaving a Minnesota lawmaker and her husband dead and another state lawmaker and his spouse in the hospital.
There are folks out there who apparently believe that political violence is an appropriate way to engage in a democracy. It never is.
Georgia's lawmakers were quick to condemn the violence. Governor Brian Kemp posting online, there is no place in America for political violence of any kind. Georgia's Senate Republicans writing in a statement, in a constitutional republic, we settle our differences through debate, elections, and the rule of law, not violence. Georgia lawmakers across the state have already been in touch with Georgia State Patrol, Capitol Police, and their local police agencies on best safety practices. Last year, the legislature passed a bill that would criminalize swatting after several of them and U.S. Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene received calls to their homes.
I think the passage of the bill is a good first step, but that's a first step.
Miller, a former prosecutor and the Democratic caucus chair, has already talked to her colleagues about passing new laws to better communication between lawmakers and police.
At the rate and the pace that our political discourse is going, I think we have to be prepared for the possibility that there may be others that want to try to use violence to interfere and engage in the political process.
And as far as specifics go, Miller said she'd like maybe some sort of database with names, addresses, and contact info for lawmakers so that any police agency has access to that in case of an emergency. We're at the state capitol. Doug Reardon, Atlanta News First.